Welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is paradigm. Now, paradigm's an interesting one because what paradigm means is control. And even though you make your decisions, you have choices, you move forward with that, there's always some element of control in the background. And it's not necessarily something that you think about, but when you get that idea or you're working to make a decision and you're thinking about it and you have forces that are stopping you based on thinking about it, that represents your paradigm. And it's a very, very powerful force. Where it essentially comes from is when you're a baby, you come to this world with nothing. But your DNA and your environment keep influencing you. You keep getting exposed to the same things over and over and over again. And that essentially creates your disposition or your paradigm. Now, the way to think about a paradigm, I know I've had a few videos in the past, but the best way to think about a paradigm is if your mind was a nightclub, the paradigm is the bouncer. And you don't have any direct communication with the bouncer. They just kind of control what comes in and what goes out, right? So every time you get that resistance at the door, something, you're, let's say, expecting to come in has any resistance, though that's your paradigm saying, hold up, that's not something that we know. And the big thing the paradigm works to do is it works to keep you safe. That's the best way to think about it. But in order to grow, you have to get outside this idea of a comfort zone. And that comfort zone is like that safety net that keeps you comfortable. And that's what your paradigm works to create and to keep you in. So every time you're actually looking to grow, you got to break through that a little bit. And that is challenging. And honestly, the bigger the growth experience, the harder your paradigm is going to be fighting against you. And for anything that you go through, you may deal with resistance from other people, from situations, from whatever it is, but there's no greater force working against your growth than the paradigm. So I wanted to talk about a few topics within that because it always helps to have an example. So like, what is my paradigm doing to stop me from executing at my best and highest potential? And one example to think about that is this idea of money. Right? So talked about the payday game and what that actually teaches kids and what that can teach adults. And again, we all kind of have that. We have these goals. We have these routines that are set up in our lives. But one primary message that I hear over and over again that I definitely want to make sure I shared is this idea of money solving problems. And I actually disagree with that a little bit for the reason that you often hear that if someone is lacking money, that, if I just had more money, that would solve my problem. Well, the challenge is that money does not solve money problems. It just doesn't. Odds are if you had more money, just like the Notorious B.I.G. Said in his song, the more money you had, the more problems that you have. And I think it's not necessarily more problems, it's different types of problems. And what you have to recognize is money does not actually solve a problem. It's a tool. And you can use a tool. If you use it well, it can bring you great benefit. If you don't use it very well, it may not give you any benefit at all. It may actually create more work or more challenges for you. And so with that, if money doesn't solve money problems, money doesn't actually solve problems either. And that's actually a message I want to make sure I share because there's so many folks that have this idea that, okay, if I have enough money or when I have enough money, what will actually happen? And it's not the money. It's what you become once, let's say, that money was in place. And so it's more of a transformation that you have to take, and it's not necessarily something that you're given. So that's actually something really, really important to understand. When you're talking about problems, it's not money that solves the problem. It's your mind. Your mind is an engine that loves solving problems. And if you're not giving it the right problems to tackle and to solve, it might get bored. I mean, you actually have to use it. You want to use it just like a muscle. And the stronger your muscle is, the more you can actually do with it. So those types of problems are the ones you want to use your mind to solve. So again, that's just, a small example, but money is something that is so highly coveted these days that you often hear certain claims and beliefs start forming from an understanding of, let's say, what money is. So I know one that I hear very often is money equals time. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that one. Money equals time, money equals time. And I think people are so accustomed to the exchange of money, and let's say the faster that it happens, the less time that's required, but the greater the time, usually there's, some type of association between the two. But it gets to the point where people say, well, money equals time. And I have to disagree with that as well. And here's my proof. My proof is if you could trade your time for all the money in the world, let's say it's not just your time, it's the rest of the time you have left, would you trade your life for all the money in the world? And I don't think that's a fair question, because if you're not actually here to do anything with it, what's the value? That's the biggest thing, right? So that's my proof breaker. I say money is not equal to time because I could not say that. I don't know, there might be a few folks out there, but if you traded all the money in the world in existence for your existence, would that be a trade? Would that be a trade that would be worthwhile? And if it's a bad trade, then I think it's hard to say that money equals time. Now, the same thing, one I hear a lot, is knowledge equals power. And again, the same idea as far as the more you know, the more powerful you become. But the issue and the challenge is, it's not what you know, it's what you do with what you know. Right? So with that, if you could have the knowledge of everything, just anything and everything that happened, if you were, just, given that knowledge, and in exchange for it, all of your decision-making authority was taken away. So you had all the knowledge in the world, but you couldn't ever make a decision. That would be incredibly difficult to swallow and fathom. Incredibly difficult. And I can think of an example of Aladdin when a sorcerer wanted to have all the powers of the genie, but he didn't know what he was asking for. So essentially what he received was the power of a genie and his own lamp. And the lamp, if you don't already know, is essentially a prison until a new master decides to rub the side of the lamp and the genie can come out and grant their wishes. So is it worth it to have all the power but not actually be able to make a decision or make use of it? If anything, you're always going to be a servant of someone else. So that, again, that's another example. But this idea of paradigm is incredibly important because it talks about this idea of control. And even though we like to understand and believe we actually understand our environment to the fullest, we can start having certain perceptions that once we actually start looking at them in a bigger capacity, we recognize how many flaws can exist within them. So I wanted to make sure I explain those ideas as well as the challenges that people actually face when it actually comes to dealing with challenges. And there's actually a really cool framework that I'm going to be talking about soon in another video called the COMPETE framework. And that framework essentially is, what do you do when you have a problem? How do you solve a problem? And it does not matter what the problem is. It doesn't matter if the problem is money. It doesn't matter if it's relationships. It doesn't matter what it is. These 7 criteria, I believe, can be used in order to address any problem. And I'm not taking a scientific method, but I'm taking everything that I've learned and that I've dealt with across a number of areas, and I was actually able to put that together. So that will be coming up soon. That COMPETE framework talks about communication, observation, movement, planning, exhibition, training, and education. And all of those come together so that you can actually address and deal with any problem. And for folks out there that are dealing with challenges, you may be executing within this framework, but the big point that I wanted to make about it is you have to take each component in its own regard. Because if you don't, you can be spinning your wheels and thinking that you are gaining traction on whatever challenge you're dealing with. But in fact, if you're not, then again, you may be hitting a few areas, but you're not hitting the entire framework. So I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate you hearing a little bit more about paradigms, what they mean, and that control piece is a force that's working against your growth. So that's something that you're going to have to come up with a game plan with. So definitely stay tuned. I have more information coming up. Definitely tune into the Compete framework. I think it's going to be something that is going to give you a lot of insight into addressing any of the challenges that you actually have going on. All right, thanks for tuning in. Catch you on the next episode. Bye.